leaders in your organization who disappear and just can't be found when you need them? It's not an uncommon occurrence in the business world to have leaders who, instead of being actively involved, tend to vanish or become unavailable when the going gets rough. These leaders, in addition to creating frustration, delayed decision making, and missed deadlines, create a void in leadership that undermines team dynamics, productivity, and accountability. And instead of providing guidance and support, they resort to tactics like neglecting their duties, being inaccessible for feedback, and avoiding conflict. It gets worse when they're confronted about their behavior or pressured by employees to give an answer or make a decision. It doesn't matter if you call, text, email, or show up at their office door, they just aren't there. They are the leaders who disappear. Sound familiar? Stay tuned as we show you just how often this happens.
Welcome to Dismantling Dysfunction, a podcast series for anyone who is ready to eliminate the dysfunction they experience in their organizations, leaders, or relationships. Each week, we explore common dysfunctions in organizations, delving into the systemic causes behind them, and giving you the exact tools and practical tips you need to dismantle them. Now, here are your hosts, organizational development and behavioral change experts, Dr. Anne Dranitsaris and Heather Dranitsaris-Hilliard.
Welcome to today's episode. We are continuing our series on accountability. And in our last episode, we discussed unconscious bullying that gets done by leaders, the causes, the impact, and what to do about it. Now, today we are addressing a different but equally damaging leadership behavior, the disappearing leader, and some of the challenges it presents to employees, productivity, and in particular accountability, because that's what our focus is on these days. The disappearing acts that leaders perform when they really just don't want to deal with issues, they don't want to confront employee performance or make difficult decisions, it's quite amazing. Now, before we continue, of course, as always, make sure that you've hit the subscribe button if you're catching us on YouTube, that you're following us on LinkedIn. If you're catching us live, turn on notification bell and do what you need to do so that you don't miss out on a single one of our leadership videos and leadership conversations. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you find it valuable. That's so helpful to us and to others who would benefit from this content. Now, let's explore those hidden blockers to accountability caused by leaders who disappear.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is going to be a really interesting topic because the phenomenon of the disappearing leader it's something that you hear employees complaining about a lot, but as an actual issue, as an actual phenomenon, it rarely gets identified in organizations. The disappearing leadership behavior, it's characterized by this pattern of absence when and at times when the leader's presence is most needed, either in decision making or conflict resolution, or just giving guidance to people on their team. When the employee has a need, the leader is nowhere to be found. And because it isn't identified as a systemic issue, it just isn't dealt with. Instead, employees talk about their leaders as being so busy, or they're always in meetings and I don't want to bother them. And they actually excuse this dysfunctional behavior instead of getting help in the organization in addressing it. And because most employees know that when confronted, their boss will probably disappear even further down their rabbit hole.
Yeah, and it's important to note that it's not just sort of your leader who might demonstrate this, but you might be a leader who has other leaders or employees reporting into you who demonstrate this behavior, because we've definitely seen that where our clients have come to us and said they've got this disappearing leader reporting into them, and whenever they try and reach out to them or their colleagues try to reach out to them, they get absolutely no response. They've gone off. We don't know where they are. So it comes across in all different levels. And it's not just about leaders, but it's that same pattern of behavior that we're looking at. And I think one of the reasons why this behavior often goes unchecked, and so people get away with it as they progress up in the organization, is it's more subtle, right? When you compare it to some of those more overtly destructive behaviors like, harassment, aggression, bullying, like we talked about in the last episode. And disappearing leaders might not necessarily be neglecting all their duties, right? It's just they've selectively withdrawn from situations. I can think about one of our clients who does this all the time. It's like people reach out because they need information from her and she just doesn't respond. And that's it. Like you can't, and there's nothing they can do about it. And everybody feels powerless in response to it. But it's not overt, right? And they disappear or are unavailable for those situations where they're actually required to get actively engaged with people, with peers, with their direct reports, with their own boss, where they need to be more visible or even be doing something that's a little bit more confrontational in terms of their management activities. And so this selective absence can sometimes be misinterpreted as a hands-off management style, but that's not what we're talking about. It's really this, and because I think we misrepresent it or mischaracterize it, nobody wants to talk about it, and it persists, the behavior persists without ever getting addressed. But the impact of such what we call presenteeism, right? They're there, but they're not there, is that it's really profound. And it leads to this vacuum, this leadership vacuum where teams feel directionless, demotivated, overwhelmed, where peers are unable to move things forward. And even where the direct managers, if they're the ones that are managing the person who's doing this, they just feel powerless to do anything.
And that's it. That word is such a great encapsulation of how people feel around this person, where 1 minute they're there and they just go back to their desk for a file and they've gone in an instant, and nobody knows where they disappear to. And the biggest challenge here, as I alluded to earlier, is when they are confronted, it just pushes them deeper into that avoidance behavior that comes so natural to them. And they often fly under the radar, their lack of presence, not immediately triggering alarms within the organization's higher management or HR departments, simply because people or employees, direct reports, they don't want to go over their manager's head. They don't want to just complain to other people about it. And so they just excuse the behavior. But as we've talked about, team members under this leadership, they just feel that hesitancy and they try and do things on their own. And then they end up doing things wrong. And while they can be worried themselves about if they rat their boss out that it will reflect badly on them, they end up looking badly because their work product and their attempts to get things done without their manager's input ends up looking bad on them because they haven't done it correctly. And this situation is further complicated in hierarchical or bureaucratic organizational structures where reporting such issues can be perceived as an overstepping of boundaries.
Yeah, and I think too, and just on that point is, I think it's hard for people to name it, right? And so they see the behavior that's going on, but again, because it's not overt, it's like, what am I going and complaining about that they're not getting back to me? Like what? Like it doesn't seem like it's a big enough deal. But this disappearing leader, it really is almost a silent because they're not around impediment to team success and morale, and it perpetuates this culture, right, where accountability is ultimately undermined. And I think about one of our clients that, whenever things got tough, it was like that was, his clue to get out of Dodge and go on a road trip and go visit all the operational locations and blow off all of his regular meetings that were scheduled, his one-on-ones with his direct reports. So you think about that, when they disappear like that, and then the leaders themselves, their direct reports or the direct reports underneath them are being left not knowing, okay, well, where do we go? What are we doing? And as Anne mentioned, it's that whole thing of setting up for success. And I was talking to a client the other day, and she had mentioned that, essentially her boss was gone for a 2-month period. And because of that, it was just that lack of availability. And then when things got derailed, they don't take responsibility for the fact that they were absent, and it was their absence that contributed to this the confusion, the lack of direction, the sort of that the lack of output, or output that is aligned with what they were expecting, because they weren't around to help manage to that alignment. And that's a fundamental aspect, obviously, from an accountability perspective. But I think employees really do experience this sense of abandonment. And this environment, really hinders accountability, because team members, and again, it's team members, we see it happening in peers. We even see it happening where our client might be the one who's managing someone who's doing this, and they have no idea where things are at, because their direct report just disappears and doesn't keep them informed. And then something happens, and then, oh yeah, well, I've already done it, or I already made a decision about it. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute, right? So you see a whole of the frustration and the confusion and the misalignment, which fundamentally leads to a lack of accountability within the organizations where these leaders are there and disappearing.
Yeah, and to your point about abandonment, Heather, this type of leader doesn't think about the impact of their behavior on their employees, and they don't realize that the way it makes their employees feel like they don't have value and that they can wait. And it puts me in mind of the conversation we had the other day, Heather, on the podcast we were on, where we talked about the Peter Pan syndrome. And these leaders tend to just want to do what they feel like doing and what makes them feel good. And dealing with conflict, that doesn't make them feel good, especially when they don't know how to resolve it. And so this disappearing leader, in terms of being accountable for their employees and their employees' success, it's not on their radar. They're more motivated by their own feelings of, I want to feel competent, and if this employee is asking too much of me or comes with too many problems and I don't feel competent, well, I just don't want to have that conversation with them. So this leads to a type of chronically absent, or missing important meetings, failing to respond to communications. They sound like teenagers. That's why I thought about the Peter Pan syndrome. Like, I don't want to do that. And so I don't want to do it. I don't have to do it, instead of really owning the responsibility and being accountable to having to do this tough stuff, like engaging in performance discussions. They don't want to do them. They put them off. They have them, walking down the hall. Oh, by the way, we have to do a review. There's nothing I need to report to you, so moving on. And really avoiding that one-on-one, really engaging with their people. And as we've said before, the demotivation, the devaluation, and which of course leads to employees acting out, and not to mention the decline in cohesion on the team and a decline in performance.
And I think it's important, and we all almost always end up framing this as that, like, we're not, talking about these folks from that perspective of, these are bad people and we're judging them. And they don't intentionally set out to avoid people or responsibility. So it's important to understand where this behavior comes from, right? And what's driving these individuals to disappear like this, or as we sometimes refer to them as going behind the wall, because it's less, we just can't reach them. And it's like, it's keeping in mind that this is a coping strategy, and they use this coping strategy typically because they haven't had the training that they need to handle these interpersonal aspects of leadership, in particular things that have conflict associated with it. And so it causes them to retreat instead of confronting these challenges and wading into the resolution of the conflict. So the absence of proper training around issue resolution, as Anne mentioned too, just that wiring of wanting to be, the one that's most knowledgeable on something. And if they don't feel that they're most knowledgeable, they're not going to talk about it. They're just going to avoid any conversation around it. And, this comes out, they also, and this is something important to understand, and why we always emphasize, personality assessment in the development of leaders, is they might have personality traits that predispose them to avoidant behaviors. And so the understanding that, knowing that, I fall in that category because I introvert my thinking function. And so it's easy to get, and if we're not aware of it, then we don't know to catch ourselves that we're doing it and to move ourselves back out of it. So it's hard even for us to manage these automatically wired self-protective strategies that we go to. Traits too, like introversion, fear of conflict, those can all lead to avoidant leadership behavior. So what we see here is that this is an approach that these people are using, a defensive strategy people are using, where they're focusing more on their self-preservation than on the success and the welfare of their team.
And they don't even know that they're doing it. That's the whole thing about this, to your point about these are coping strategies because they want to feel the way they want to feel. And, it put me in mind of one of the ways this behavior really manifests in when you're talking about personality type, Heather, those leaders are entrepreneurs that like to give that really high level without necessarily getting into the detail, without providing oversight or support. And, they might hand off tasks and then disappear, leaving team members without the guidance they need to successfully complete their work. And they don't think of themselves as disappearing. They think of themselves as trusting their employees. And of course, what do the employees feel? Well, they're frustrated, they're confused, they struggle, they don't know whether or not it's permissible to, search out their boss to get a decision or to get clarification. And, puts me in mind of an example, a recent example of one of our clients, a department head at a tech company, who had set really ambitious goals for a significant software development project. But after inspiring the team, and you see a lot of this with entrepreneurs, this inspirational personality type, and he inspired the team with this really clear vision and high expectation, and then disappeared, leaving the team without any guidance on resource allocation, how to make decisions, timelines. And any attempts to seek clarity were met with non-responses, or he would actually cancel important meetings at the last minute or deflect things, pushing the team to figure it out. Well, that thought, and we've talked about this in other podcasts, where leaders will say, well, I didn't need it, and so I don't think my people should need it too. And this lack of leadership, this disappearing lack of tactical direction, all it led to was the project tanking, because it was initiated with enthusiasm, but it suffered due to the absence of actionable guidance. And this really highlights how a leader's disappearance after setting ambitious targets can derail a whole team's ability to succeed, as well as a good idea can just be cast to the wayside because this leader will think, oh, we can't do that, let's move on to something else.
Yeah. And I think that, and I go back to one of the things you said, Anne, which is just these leaders don't know that they're doing this, right? Because it is automatic, it's unconscious. And I think about, I could just start thinking about all of the stories, right, of our clients and some of the things that we've heard when we work with clients, but we don't necessarily always work with all of the leaders within the group. And we're sort of we're working with them to coach them on how to deal with this. And I just think of a recent example of one where, our client was saying that their direct manager is constantly emphasizing the importance of relationships and how, and so if he has members of his team, his leadership team, that are not necessarily functioning as effectively together. But same thing when it's like, okay, well, how do we resolve this? It's like, you guys figure it out, I'm out of here. And it's like, but wait a minute, you're in this dynamic too, right? This isn't about other people. Like, it's you as a leader. Any of these things that are going on, we play an active role in it. Our behavior contributes to it. And so that idea of abandoning others to resolve it. But again, we do this when we don't know what to do. We don't feel like we have the expertise to navigate people through it. And so we just tell them to go do it. And then, off we go and we leave it to them. And, the other thing that comes up here is that, if people can't figure it out, because really, honestly, if they'd been able to figure it out, it already would have been resolved. And so obviously it's more complex than that, and more is needed to consider it. But the leaders are just not there. These leaders that disappear are just not available for critical issues, sometimes even during emergencies. And I'm amazed where it's like that. They'll respond to really, really quickly to kind of low totem pole items or low items that from a priority perspective, very, very quickly. But stuff that's more critical will sit in their inbox for days and days. And they're looking at their email, and yet they're not responding to these things. And again, that avoidance, right? And as I said earlier, we see them actually physically absent themselves even from the office and not putting anybody in charge or with the ability to make some of these decisions or making themselves available despite the fact that they're out of the office. So these are all the behavioral patterns that we see. And then as a result, we see this escalation of problems, missed opportunities, issues don't get addressed properly. And all of this, obviously, these are all blockers to effective accountability and fostering a culture of accountability. And we even see these ones, they'll absent themselves from team building activities when they're actually needed for team cohesiveness, right? They're like, yeah, just, everybody else can do it. I don't want to do it. I remember a client of ours where it was the CEO of this organization when we were working to develop up the executive team and to make them more effective. And he would come in and out of his executive meetings. We would never know if he was going to show up or not show up. And so we actually had to, and we worked with this executive team to learn how to run the business despite the disappearing act of the CEO.
Well, and to this point, Heather, you can see how avoidance becomes normal behavior. And that once a number of leaders are doing this, then the next level of leaders starts to do it as well. And they start to just mirror these dysfunctional leadership behaviors. And leaders who shy away from responsibilities, they don't even recognize their actions as detrimental, because the other thing about normalizing disappearing leaders is that they also learn to be helpless in response to their leaders' behavior. And you hear this collective, well, we can't do anything about it. And so they'll probably, just be disappointed that we're not going to get the work done the way they wanted to. And we just have to suck it up. And there's nothing we can do about it. And you see this collective lethargy start. And there's an implicit acceptance of leadership autonomy where the leader's action, like in your example, including the absence, it's not questioned, and no one's saying, hey, why aren't you showing up and participating in a team building activity? How can we do this without you? And so the leaders aren't questioned under this guise of trust or respect for the decision-making process. And also naming, they're introverted, they're low key, they're hands off, they're laissez-faire, or some misguided idea of employee empowerment by just leaving people to do their own thing. And this normalization of passive leadership perpetuates a cycle where engagement and commitment and accountability, lack of accountability, it becomes a norm affecting the entire organizational culture.
And I think that, part of the tough thing here is that when we look at most individuals and organizations, they don't want to challenge people in positions of authority. That fear of reprisal, or if I speak up, then that's somehow going to jeopardize my role or my position within the organization. And that apprehension then furthers the silence on the issue, right? So we've got absent and disappearing leaders, and then we have people sort of sitting around and not saying anything, as Anne mentioned. And so the behavior just continues unchecked, essentially. And we see this sort of happen out in the organization, and we've even seen it where we've called out some of our clients on it, and still and so the sort of you'll see a little bit of a shift and then they go back into the pattern, right? It's an unconscious pattern of behavior that, you know, you really have to become aware of. And I'd made that comment about, even for myself, because this is my sort of personality orientation to a degree, is like just recognizing when I've been pulled into that so that I'm able to move myself out. But it's not easy, because it's like this automatic thing, and that, you know, we see these clients where you know, again, they have been confronted around the pattern of disappearance, and where their direct reports say, I need more clarity, I need more collaboration, I need more involvement. And the person that's been confronted, be it the CEO or another leader, they actually retreat even further. And so it can actually really backfire with these individuals, again, because they don't know how to make that shift, right? And because it's unconscious, because it's hardwired to a degree, and they don't then say, oh, here's something maybe I need to get some support for. This is a developmental gap for me where I'm going to actually need to work with somebody in order to do that. And because they go into a further level of avoidance, it makes the challenges, you know, grow. It makes it even tougher for, you know, those that are in the position of trying to deal with this, or to help the leader to navigate through it, and they don't see the change, right? And the other thing is, like, not to underestimate the impact that all of this has on morale. So every time a leader disappears, it's like it pulls the organization back, right? The organization's getting momentum, the leader's there, leader's present, leader goes behind the wall, disappears, and then everything comes to a stop. And then when the leader comes back, they're like, hey, what's happened? And why are all these things here? As though it's all magically going to continue along in their absence. So it really is a tough dynamic. And again, I know it's not as overt as the bullying that we talked about in the last episode, but wow, this is a very, very powerful dysfunction that gets in the way of accountability practices.
Yeah, and just moving us into the territory of you know, another way that they set themselves up to disappear is that they might not deliver clear expectations, and then get frustrated when the work is done incorrectly. And then, because they don't like confronting or giving feedback to their employees, they disappear even further. And the lack of communication and the lack of clarity, it results in misaligned efforts and team members working in silos, and one person saying, I think we should do it like this, and another going, no, I disagree, we should do it in this way. And then everybody is working at cross purposes, and the leaders absenting themselves from thinking, to your point, Heather, they don't think that they've done anything wrong, because they have simply in their mind delegated to competent people. But even the most competent of our employees, when doing a new task, or, you know, getting behind a new initiative, they need expectations and their roles and the timeline. They need things set for them, and they need that initial agreement up front. And so not only do they take responsibility for launching some of these projects and setting expectations, but they don't take responsibility for the failure of these projects. And this really creates a vacuum in accountability. And, you know, team members, as much as they try to take on the additional responsibilities, they're not in the brain of their leader. They don't know what their leader is thinking and what they want and what it looks like to them. And this is incredibly stressful for them. And to a great extent, it's not fair to them, because these people are doing the very best they can under the conditions of not getting expectations clarified for them, so that they can be successful at whatever it is they're doing. And so the accumulation, and we always look at, you know, it's not just one person's behavior, it's the dynamic of it, where the leader behaves like this, and then the employees behave like this, and it further gets complicated by other teams. And then all of a sudden, you've got a toxic work environment and high employee turnover, and a culture where trust and respect for the leader are eroded.
Yeah, it's just it's not a it's interesting that we're talking about this. And obviously, part of the reason why Anne and I wanted to have an episode on this topic is because it is so prevalent in organizations that we do run into it at all levels, and really wanting to be able to sort of shed some light on it, make it normalize it, as we often talk about with these dysfunctions, to understand that this is normal. These are the things that occur, and then to look at what are our strategies in order to be able to move out of it. And that's where we're at right now in our episode. We're at that point where we like to drop our gem of the podcast, that actionable item that you can take to begin to tackle this particular accountability blocker, whether it's others in the organization or whether you put your hand up and recognize yourself in this pattern of behavior. And the reality is, when we think about what do we do about this, and how do we actually close the developmental gap that this behavior is stemming from, the reality is that without training in areas like communication and emotional intelligence, even in engagement strategies, in terms of how you work with your employees, really understanding that piece from an accountability perspective, leaders can and will continue to default to an avoidance style. So, and that's where, again, as they disappear. And so if you're a leader who disappears, or you have leaders who are using this self-protective strategy, you can be happy to hear that one of the first things we have to do is just to identify it as a performance issue. That's always the first step. And we know, we sort of caution that it can cause people to take a further step back, but it needs to be put on the table. And then creating that performance development plan that absolutely has to include coaching and leadership development activities. This is not a gap that leaders or individuals can solve on their own, right? It's, again, they have to deal with developing up the self-awareness, the self-management, the impulse control, and the communication strategies, issue resolution strategies, conflict resolution strategies to actually be able to be effective. We have to equip these leaders, these individuals who are practicing this avoidant leadership, we have to equip them with the tools to, how do I be more present? How do I be more approachable? How do I be more supportive? How do I stay when everything in me is saying, go, run, hide, disappear, right? And holding these leaders accountable is making sure that there's a mechanism for holding them accountable for that level of presence and engagement and ongoing support. Feedback becomes really important, right? That we're actually able to hold them to this. So this is just if you're thinking about this for you as an individual, you need to look at it from that. I need to develop these skills. I need to gain these tools. I need to work through my own behavioral patterns. I got to change some of that wiring in my brain in order to break these automatic habits of mine. And then I need the support organizationally to make sure that I'm able to continue to play this out. If you're looking to change others in the organization, again, path is the same, it's development, but you can take it on starting first with how do you confront, how do you identify the performance gap, and then work with the individuals to build that plan out.
It's so important, because I think one of the stumbling blocks for many leaders is they think that the issue is outside of themselves and they're not contributing, and really saying, I'm contributing, this is my team, and if it's happening like this, it all starts with me. So that's a wrap for this episode of Dismantling Dysfunction. As always, we're your hosts, Heather Dranitsaris-Hilliard, and myself, Dr. Anne Dranitsaris. Thanks so much for listening, and join us for our next episode, where we have another fantastic episode for you. We're going to explore the hidden blockers to accountability caused by leaders who nurture. Prioritizing nurturing over results. We also call this the matriarchal leadership dysfunction, which we've talked about before, where managing performance issues and meeting goals and expectations place second place to providing support and ensuring the emotional well-being of employees. Both are really important. And so when we prioritize feelings over results, we're going to run into a whole bunch of issues. We've got a lot of great examples on this one. So remember, if you're feeling challenged by the accountability gaps or blockers in your organization or in your leadership approach, and want to know more about what you can do about it, contact us for a free consultation. We have what you need, and whatever the gap is in your organization, we have what it takes to help you undo some of these accountability blockers. And if you don't want the consultation right away, register for our free webinar, which we're having weekly, Why Leaders Avoid Fostering Accountability. It offers insight into the 4 key mistakes leaders make when it comes to creating a culture of accountability, and offers you the exact blueprint you can implement to foster accountability in your organization.
Thank you for investing your valuable time in listening to us or catching our video here, whether you're watching it live or on the replay. And hope you are walking away with some great insights into the competencies that your leaders need to set that stage for alignment and accountability in your organization and to break the habit of disappearing, as we specifically talked about today. Don't forget our LinkedIn Live videos, our podcasts, all of these that can be found on our YouTube channel, Dranitsaris-Hilliard. Remember, subscribe to our channel, follow us on LinkedIn, make sure your notifications are turned on so that you are updated whenever we release new videos. And if you found this information helpful, we really appreciate you giving it a thumbs up or giving us a rating on your favorite podcast platform so that other leaders just like you can find it and benefit from it. Thanks again, once again, for being in our audience. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next video.
Thank you for listening to the Dismantling Dysfunction podcast with Dr. Ann Dranitsaris and Heather Dranitsaris-Hilliard, organizational development and behavioral change experts. Be sure to subscribe to get more practical insights and focused tools to help you dismantle dysfunction in your organizations, leaders, or relationships. For more information, visit dismantlingdysfunction.com.